Camille was enjoying a peaceful afternoon at a park in Fort Collins, Colorado, immersed in a good book and appreciating a rare moment of solitude. As a respected judge with a demanding schedule, these moments were few and far between. The gentle sounds of children playing and joggers passing by created a serene atmosphere until the sharp screech of tires disrupted the calm. A police cruiser pulled up near the curb, drawing the attention of onlookers. Two officers stepped out, their expressions serious and their focus fixed on Camille, the only person sitting alone nearby. "Ma'am, may we speak with you for a moment?" one officer asked, his tone carrying suspicion rather than concern. Camille glanced up, her composure intact despite the sudden scrutiny. "Of course," she replied calmly, carefully closing her book. The second officer approached, his tone clipped and authoritative. "We got a call about some suspicious activity in the area. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Camille's eyebrows raised in disbelief. Suspicious activity? She was simply sitting and reading. Nevertheless, she remained polite, holding up her book as if to provide evidence of her innocence. "I'm just enjoying the park," she said softly. But the officer's skepticism didn't waver. "Can we see some ID?" the first officer demanded. A flicker of unease settled in Camille's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "May I ask why?" she inquired, her voice measured. "It's routine," came the curt reply, though the undertone of authority suggested otherwise. A small crowd began to gather, sensing that something wasn't right. Camille sighed and reached into her bag, pulling out her wallet. She handed over her driver's license, her name clearly displayed, Camille Johnson. The officer read her name aloud almost mockingly and continued his questioning. "What's your business here, Miss Johnson?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. Camille inhaled deeply, keeping her patience intact. "I live here. I came to enjoy the park. Is that a problem?" she asked, her tone remaining respectful yet firm. But the officers didn't back down. Their questions became more intrusive. "Do you always carry a book like that around?" one sneered. "Are you waiting for someone?" the other added, his hand resting on his belt in a deliberate show of authority. Camille's patience wore thin. "I'm not answering any more questions unless you tell me what I'm being accused of," she stated firmly. Her refusal triggered an immediate shift in their demeanor. "Don't get smart with us," one officer snapped, stepping forward. "We're just doing our job." "And I know the law," Camille replied, her voice steady. "I'm not breaking it by sitting in a public park." But logic and reason were not part of their agenda. Without warning, the first officer grabbed her arm. "You're resisting," he declared, despite Camille's complete lack of movement. "What are you doing?" Camille exclaimed, startled and confused. The murmurs from the growing crowd turned to audible concern. Someone pulled out a phone to record the unfolding scene. "Stop resisting," the officer repeated, louder this time, as if trying to justify his actions to the onlookers. Before Camille could comprehend what was happening, the cold steel of handcuffs snapped around her wrists. Humiliation and frustration burned within her, but Camille maintained her composure even as the officers led her toward the patrol car. As she glanced back at the crowd, her eyes locked onto the young woman recording the incident. For a brief moment, there was a silent exchange, a plea for the truth to be documented. The car door slammed shut, and Camille knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Inside the cramped back seat of the police cruiser, Camille's mind raced. As a seasoned judge, she had spent years presiding over cases, upholding the law, and ensuring justice was served. Yet here she was, on the other side of the system she had sworn to protect. The absurdity of the situation struck her, but there was no humor in it, only anger and a determination to fight back. The ride to the station was suffocatingly silent, save for the occasional crackle of the police radio. Camille's thoughts shifted from disbelief to strategy. This was not an experience she would let slide. She would ensure that those who had wronged her would be held accountable. The system that had tried to silence her would hear her voice loud and clear. Camille had always believed in the power of the law. As a judge, she had dedicated her career to upholding justice and ensuring that fairness prevailed in the courtroom. But after her wrongful arrest by Officers Carter and Daniels in a Fort Collins park, her perspective shifted. What had started as a quiet afternoon with a book had turned into a humiliating ordeal that left her handcuffed and treated like a criminal. Now, as she sat in her living room late at night, surrounded by legal documents, her mind was focused not on her past cases but on her own. She was no longer just a judge presiding over cases of injustice. This time, she was the one seeking justice. In the weeks following her arrest, Camille worked tirelessly to build a civil rights case against the officers in the department that had enabled their behavior. The video of her arrest, captured by a bystander in the park, had gone viral, sparking outrage across the community. Messages of support flooded her inbox. People who had faced similar injustices reached out, sharing their own stories of humiliation and discrimination. Camille knew that this wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been silenced, ignored, or mistreated by those sworn to protect and serve. This time, she wasn't fighting just for herself. She was fighting for them too. As her case gained traction, Camille's reputation as a judge added weight to the public discourse. People saw her not just as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience and accountability. Her decision to take a stand resonated deeply, especially in a system where the scales of justice often tipped against marginalized communities. Camille didn't seek media attention, but the spotlight found her. Reporters wanted interviews, and community leaders invited her to speak at forums about police accountability and systemic reform. But Camille's focus remained on the legal battle ahead. She combed through case law, pulling precedents that highlighted the abuse of power and the violation of civil rights. She assembled a team of trusted colleagues, each committed to exposing the flaws in the system and ensuring that justice was served. While Camille's legal battle was moving forward, fate had another twist in store. One afternoon, her attorney delivered surprising news. "Camille," he began cautiously, "you've been assigned as the judge for one of the officers' upcoming misconduct hearings." Camille's heart skipped a beat. The irony was almost poetic. She had spent weeks preparing to face these officers in court as a plaintiff. But now, she would see them again. This time from the bench, with the power to determine their fate. The weight of this unexpected turn settled on her shoulders, but Camille was undeterred. She had built her career on fairness and impartiality, and she would not let personal feelings cloud her judgment. When the day of the hearing arrived, Camille walked into the courtroom with the same calm, authoritative presence she was known for. Her black robe flowed behind her as she took her seat on the bench. The courtroom was filled with an air of anticipation, but Camille remained composed. When Officers Carter and Daniels entered and saw her, their confidence visibly cracked. Their expressions shifted from indifference to unease as they realized who would be presiding over their case. Camille didn't let the moment distract her. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And justice, she reminded herself, was not about power. It was about doing what was right. As the hearing began, Camille listened intently, her gaze unwavering. She had come full circle, from victim to judge, and now she had the chance to ensure that the system she had dedicated her life to would hold those who abused their authority accountable. Camille had always been a firm believer in the power of justice, but after her own wrongful arrest by Officers Carter and Daniels, her commitment to fairness took on a deeper, more personal meaning. As a judge, Camille had spent years ensuring that every individual in her courtroom was treated with dignity and respect. But her experience in that Fort Collins park had exposed the harsh reality that not everyone was granted that same fairness. What began as a peaceful afternoon with a book had spiraled into a humiliating ordeal, leaving her handcuffed and treated as a suspect without cause. But Camille wasn't one to back down. She knew this fight was bigger than her. It was about challenging a system that too often failed the people it was meant to protect. Weeks after her arrest, Camille was more determined than ever to pursue justice. The video of her wrongful detention had gone viral, sparking public outrage and igniting conversations about police misconduct and racial bias. Messages of support poured in from people who had faced similar injustices, each story adding fuel to Camille's resolve. But her fight wasn't just about holding Carter and Daniels accountable. It was about exposing the systemic flaws that allowed such incidents to occur in the first place. Camille's experience had given her a new perspective, and she was ready to use her position on the bench to ensure that meaningful change followed. Then came an unexpected twist that shifted the narrative entirely. Camille was assigned to preside over a misconduct hearing involving the very officers who had wrongfully arrested her. The irony was not lost on her. As she stepped into the courtroom that day, her presence commanded attention. The officers, once so confident in their unchecked authority, now sat at the defendant's table, visibly uneasy as they realized who would be overseeing their case. Camille maintained her composure, her expression calm and unreadable. She wasn't there for vengeance. She was there to uphold the principles of fairness and integrity that had guided her throughout her career. The courtroom was silent as Camille began the proceedings, her voice steady and authoritative. The officers shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, perhaps realizing for the first time the true weight of their actions. For Camille, this moment wasn't just about personal vindication. It was about sending a clear message that justice must apply to everyone, regardless of their position or power. As she presided over the case, she knew that this was an opportunity to hold those in authority accountable and to pave the way for lasting change. Camille Johnson had always been a pillar of fairness and integrity in her courtroom. As a judge, she had spent her career ensuring that everyone who stood before her was treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background. But her wrongful arrest at the hands of Officers Carter and Daniels had shattered that sense of justice. What should have been a quiet afternoon reading in a park had turned into a humiliating ordeal, leaving Camille in handcuffs and treated as a suspect without cause. The experience was not just a personal violation, but a stark reminder of the systemic flaws in law enforcement that disproportionately targeted people of color. However, Camille was not one to be silenced. She knew that her position gave her the power to make a real difference, and she was determined to use that power to bring about change. After her release, Camille wasted no time. She worked tirelessly, drafting a civil rights lawsuit that not only targeted the officers, but aimed to expose the systemic biases that enabled such behavior. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had been unjustly treated and silenced. As the days passed, the community rallied around her. The viral video of her arrest had ignited public outrage, and people from all walks of life reached out to share their own stories of injustice. Camille felt the weight of their expectations, but rather than feeling burdened, it fueled her determination to hold the system accountable. Then came the twist that no one saw coming. Camille was assigned to preside over a misconduct hearing involving the same officers who had arrested her. The irony was staggering, but Camille saw it as an opportunity, not for revenge, but for justice. As she entered the courtroom that day, the air was thick with tension. The officers, once so confident in their authority, now sat at the defendant's table, visibly uncomfortable as they realized who would be deciding their fate. Camille's demeanor was calm and composed as she took her seat on the bench. Her voice was steady as she began the proceedings, making it clear that this hearing would be conducted with the same fairness and impartiality she had always upheld. But there was no mistaking the shift in power dynamics. The officers who had once humiliated her were now being held accountable in her courtroom. They squirmed under her gaze, their previous arrogance replaced by uncertainty. Throughout the hearing, Camille maintained her professionalism, listening intently to the evidence presented. She knew this case wasn't just about their actions. It was about setting a precedent, about showing that no one was above the law. Her ruling was firm but fair, ensuring that Carter and Daniels faced the consequences of their actions, while also emphasizing the need for retraining and reform within the department. When the gavel finally came down, Camille felt a sense of closure, but she knew her work was far from over. This wasn't just about two officers. It was about changing a system that had failed too many for too long. Camille left the courtroom that day with renewed purpose, ready to continue the fight for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been denied it. Camille Johnson's journey from victim to victor was not an easy one, but it was a story that inspired an entire community. After her wrongful arrest by Officers Carter and Daniels, Camille's life had been turned upside down. Sitting in the back of a police cruiser that afternoon, her mind had raced with thoughts of injustice and disbelief. But instead of dwelling on her humiliation, she used that experience as fuel to take action. Camille was not just any woman. She was a judge who understood the law inside and out, and she knew exactly what steps to take to ensure that this injustice would not go unchecked. Upon her release, Camille's focus shifted from her own humiliation to a larger mission. She meticulously built a civil rights case, not only against the officers, but also to expose the deep-seated biases within the system that allowed such behavior to continue unchecked. But even as she worked tirelessly on her case, something unexpected happened. Her story resonated beyond the walls of her courtroom. The viral video of her arrest had sparked national outrage, and people across the country began sharing their own stories of mistreatment by law enforcement. What started as a fight for her own justice quickly transformed into a movement for broader reform. As the weeks went by, Camille's efforts gained momentum. She attended community meetings, listened to stories from others who had experienced similar injustices, and advocated for systemic change. Her presence was not just symbolic, it was powerful. Seeing a respected judge speak out against misconduct and demand accountability gave others the courage to raise their voices as well. Camille knew that real change required more than just one case. It required a shift in culture and policy, and she was determined to be the catalyst for that change. The turning point came when Camille was assigned to preside over a misconduct hearing involving officers Carter and Daniels. The irony was undeniable, but Camille approached the situation with the same professionalism and integrity that had defined her career. She made it clear from the outset that this hearing would be conducted fairly, despite the personal history she had with the defendants. But there was no mistaking the discomfort in the room as the officers realized who would be determining their fate. During the hearing, Camille maintained her composure, ensuring that every piece of evidence was heard and evaluated objectively. But as the testimonies unfolded, it became clear that Carter and Daniels had a pattern of abusing their authority. Their actions weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a troubling pattern that had gone unchecked for too long. Camille's ruling was decisive. The officers were found guilty of misconduct and were subjected to suspension, retraining, and disciplinary records that would follow them throughout their careers. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom was silent for a moment before the weight of the decision settled in. Camille's decision was not just about two officers. It was about sending a message that accountability mattered and that the system would no longer turn a blind eye to injustice. In the aftermath, Camille continued to advocate for broader reforms. Her work led to new policies aimed at increasing transparency, improving police training, and ensuring that incidents like hers would become less frequent. She used her platform to speak at public forums, engage with community leaders, and mentor young attorneys and judges about the importance of upholding justice for all. Camille's fight for justice had started with her own experience, but it had become so much more. She had turned her pain into purpose, and her commitment to fairness had sparked a movement that would leave a lasting impact on her community. For Camille, true justice wasn't just about winning one case. It was about changing the system for the better, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had gone through. And in that, she had truly succeeded. Camille Johnson's journey had taken an unexpected turn when she was wrongfully arrested by officers Carter and Daniels at a local park. What started as a peaceful afternoon reading under the shade of an oak tree ended with her in handcuffs, humiliated and treated as a criminal despite her innocence. But Camille was not just another victim of injustice. She was a judge who understood the law, the system, and the power of holding people accountable. When the officers arrested her that day, they had no idea that they would face her again, not as a defendant, but as the judge overseeing their case. Camille's arrest had sparked a wave of outrage across the community, especially after a bystander's video went viral, capturing the unjust treatment she endured. The footage showed Camille maintaining her composure while being wrongfully accused, yet her calm demeanor only emphasized the imbalance of power in the situation. As the video spread online, it ignited conversations about racial profiling and abuse of authority, and the public began demanding accountability. Camille, however, remained focused on her mission. She was determined to ensure that this incident would not be swept under the rug like so many others. After her release, Camille wasted no time building her case. She meticulously reviewed the evidence, consulted with legal experts, and prepared a civil rights lawsuit against the officers in the department. But as she worked on the case, something unexpected happened. Camille's dedication to justice led her to an assignment that would change everything. She was appointed to preside over a misconduct hearing involving none other than officers Carter and Daniels. The irony was almost too perfect. Camille knew she had to approach this case with unwavering professionalism, ensuring that justice would be served not out of vengeance, but out of a commitment to fairness. When the day of the hearing arrived, the courtroom was filled with tension. News of Camille's appointment had spread, and reporters, activists, and community members filled the seats, eager to witness what many considered a moment of poetic justice. Carter and Daniels, sitting at the defendant's table, wore expressions of discomfort and disbelief as Camille took her place on the bench. For the first time, they were not in control of the situation, and they knew it. Throughout the hearing, Camille maintained her composure, listening attentively as evidence was presented. Testimonies from victims, including herself, painted a damning picture of the officers' pattern of misconduct. It became clear that Carter and Daniels had a history of abusing their authority, often targeting vulnerable individuals with little regard for the consequences. Camille, however, did not let her personal experience cloud her judgment. She approached the case with the same objectivity and fairness that had defined her career, ensuring that the proceedings were conducted with integrity. When it came time for Camille to deliver her ruling, the weight of the moment was palpable. The courtroom fell silent as she spoke, her words measured but firm. She outlined the officers' misconduct, the harm they had caused, and the undeniable pattern of abuse that could no longer be ignored. Her decision was clear. Carter and Daniels were found guilty of misconduct and were subjected to suspension, retraining, and a permanent disciplinary record that would follow them for the rest of their careers. The verdict sent shockwaves through the community. It was a powerful reminder that no one was above the law, not even those entrusted with enforcing it. Camille's decision resonated far beyond the walls of the courtroom, inspiring others to speak out against injustice and sparking conversations about the need for systemic reform. In the aftermath of the ruling, Camille's influence extended beyond the courtroom. She became a prominent voice for accountability and fairness, using her platform to advocate for meaningful change. She engaged with community leaders, attended town hall meetings, and mentored young attorneys, emphasizing the importance of justice that transcends race, class, and position. For Camille, the victory was not just personal. It was a step toward ensuring that the system she had dedicated her life to would serve everyone with dignity and respect. Her journey had come full circle, proving that when the scales of justice tip too far, it takes courage, resilience, and unwavering commitment to restore balance. Camille Johnson's journey from victim to champion of justice was far from over. After being wrongfully arrested by officers Carter and Daniels for simply sitting in a park reading a book, Camille knew she couldn't let the injustice go unchecked. Though humiliated and frustrated by the experience, she was not just any ordinary citizen. She was a judge who had dedicated her career to upholding fairness and protecting the rights of the marginalized. With her knowledge, determination, and unshakable resolve, Camille turned her personal experience into a catalyst for real change. What began as a case of wrongful arrest soon became a movement to reform a broken system. After her release from custody, Camille wasted no time. Fueled by a desire to expose the injustices that had been inflicted not only on her but on countless others, she filed a civil rights lawsuit against the officers and the police department. However, as she prepared her case, she was unexpectedly assigned to preside over a misconduct hearing involving the very same officers who had arrested her. It was a situation steeped in irony. Fate had placed her in a position where she would now have the power to hold her oppressors accountable. When Camille took her place on the bench during the hearing, the courtroom was buzzing with anticipation. News of her arrest and subsequent assignment to the case had drawn widespread attention, filling the room with reporters, activists, and members of the community who had been following her story. Carter and Daniels sat at the defense table, their composure visibly shaken as they realized who was presiding over their case. For the first time, they were on the other side of the law, facing the consequences of their actions. Camille, however, was determined to approach the case with impartiality. She maintained her professionalism, ensuring that the hearing was conducted fairly and without bias. As the evidence unfolded, it became clear that Carter and Daniels had a pattern of abusing their authority. Witness testimonies revealed multiple instances of excessive force, racial profiling, and unwarranted arrests. The officers' actions reflected a troubling disregard for the very principles they had sworn to uphold. Camille listened intently, taking detailed notes and ensuring that every piece of evidence was thoroughly examined. When the time came for her to deliver her ruling, Camille's words echoed through the courtroom with measured authority. She acknowledged the gravity of the situation and emphasized that law enforcement officers are held to the highest standard of accountability. "The trust placed in those who wear the badge must not be taken lightly," she said. "When that trust is violated, it erodes the foundation of our justice system." Her ruling was firm but fair. Both officers were suspended without pay, ordered to undergo retraining, and placed under strict disciplinary review. But Camille's fight didn't stop there. She understood that systemic change required more than just addressing individual cases of misconduct. She used her platform as a judge to advocate for comprehensive police reform. She spoke at community forums, engaged with policymakers, and pushed for policies that promoted transparency, accountability, and community engagement. Camille also worked closely with local organizations to ensure that marginalized voices were heard and that law enforcement practices reflected the values of fairness and equality. As the weeks went by, Camille's efforts began to ripple throughout the community. Police departments across the state started reevaluating their policies, implementing new training programs focused on de-escalation and bias awareness. More importantly, the community felt empowered to speak out against injustice. Camille had become a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope for those who had long been silenced. One evening, after a particularly long day, Camille attended a community meeting where residents shared their stories and concerns. An elderly woman approached her after the meeting, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us." Camille's heart swelled with gratitude, knowing that her fight had ignited a movement far greater than she could have ever imagined. For Camille, this journey was never about personal vindication. It was about ensuring that the system she had sworn to uphold served everyone with fairness, dignity, and respect. Her story was proof that real change was possible, and as long as there were people willing to speak out and take action, the fight for justice would never be in vain. Camille Johnson's pursuit of justice extended far beyond the courtroom. Her initial encounter with Officers Carter and Daniels, who wrongfully arrested her while she was reading in a public park, had set her on a path that would not only challenge her resilience, but also spark a movement for systemic change. As a judge who had spent her career ensuring fairness and equality in the justice system, Camille's experience on the other side of the law revealed how deeply entrenched biases could manipulate the very system she had worked to uphold. But instead of allowing herself to be consumed by frustration, Camille channeled her anger into action, determined to make sure that others wouldn't have to endure the same indignities. After presiding over the misconduct hearing that ultimately held Carter and Daniels accountable for their pattern of abuse, Camille knew that her work was just beginning. The ruling may have delivered justice in that particular case, but it was merely a band-aid on a wound that ran much deeper. Camille understood that true reform required addressing the structural flaws that allowed such injustices to persist. So, she took her fight beyond the courtroom and into the heart of the community. Camille partnered with local organizations to host community forums, where residents could share their experiences with law enforcement. She listened intently as people recounted stories of racial profiling, excessive force, and a deep sense of distrust toward the system. These conversations reinforced what Camille already knew. Real change could only happen if those most affected by injustice were given a seat at the table. She advocated for policies that prioritized transparency and accountability, including mandatory body cameras for officers, independent civilian oversight, and comprehensive bias training. Her efforts soon caught the attention of state and local lawmakers. Camille was invited to testify before legislative committees, where she passionately spoke about the need for policy reforms that addressed the root causes of systemic inequality. She presented compelling data and first-hand accounts that highlighted the disparities in law enforcement practices. Her voice, once confined to a courtroom, now echoed in the halls of government, pushing those in power to confront the uncomfortable truths that had long been ignored. But Camille didn't stop there. Recognizing the importance of educating the next generation, she began teaching seminars at local law schools, focusing on ethics, civil rights, and the impact of systemic bias in the judicial system. Her story became a powerful case study, inspiring aspiring lawyers and judges to see their roles as more than enforcers of the law, but as advocates for justice. She mentored young attorneys, encouraging them to challenge injustices and use their positions to create meaningful change. The ripple effect of Camille's work was undeniable. Within months, new policies were implemented across police departments, and civilian oversight boards were established to ensure greater accountability. Community members reported feeling safer and more empowered to engage with law enforcement, knowing that their voices were finally being heard. Camille had not only changed policies, she had changed the culture. One evening, as Camille attended a community rally advocating for continued reforms, she watched with quiet pride as young activists led chants and shared their visions for a more just society. A young woman approached her, her eyes filled with admiration. "Judge Johnson, I want to be like you someday," she said softly. Camille's heart swelled with hope. "Then keep fighting," she replied with a warm smile, "because this is just the beginning." For Camille, the fight for justice was never about personal vindication. It was about leaving a legacy that ensured future generations wouldn't have to fight the same battles. Her unwavering dedication had not only transformed her own ordeal into a powerful movement, but had also laid the foundation for a system where equality and fairness were no longer aspirations but realities. Camille's story was a testament to the power of resilience, determination, and the unwavering belief that true justice begins when voices that have long been silenced are finally heard. Camille Johnson's journey from being wrongfully arrested to becoming a catalyst for change in the justice system was not just a personal victory. It was the spark that ignited a movement. When officers Carter and Daniels detained her without cause, they had no idea they had crossed paths with a woman who would not let their actions go unchallenged. Camille, a respected judge, understood the law better than most, and instead of letting the humiliation and injustice consume her, she turned her experience into fuel for meaningful reform. Her fight wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about dismantling a system that allowed prejudice to flourish unchecked. After overseeing the misconduct hearing that held Carter and Daniels accountable, Camille knew the battle was far from over. True change wouldn't come from a single courtroom victory. It required a complete overhaul of the system that enabled such abuses in the first place. Camille took her fight to the public, using her platform as a judge to push for structural reforms that would hold law enforcement accountable. She spearheaded initiatives that advocated for independent civilian review boards, mandatory bias training for officers, and strict protocols for handling cases involving marginalized communities. Camille also worked closely with community leaders to establish safe spaces where residents could voice their concerns about law enforcement. These forums provided a platform for individuals who had long been silenced, allowing them to share their experiences and highlight the systemic inequalities that plagued their neighborhoods. Through these conversations, Camille gained a deeper understanding of the widespread mistrust between communities of color and the police, reinforcing her resolve to ensure that justice was not just an abstract concept, but a lived reality for everyone. Her advocacy didn't stop at the local level. Camille testified before state legislators, providing data-backed evidence that exposed patterns of racial bias in law enforcement practices. Her powerful testimony, combined with the overwhelming public support, pressured lawmakers to enact sweeping reforms that included increased oversight, improved training protocols, and policies designed to reduce disparities in law enforcement. Camille's efforts extended beyond policy changes. She was determined to change the culture of policing from the inside out. But Camille knew that lasting change required educating the next generation. She began teaching seminars at local law schools, focusing on ethics, civil rights, and the importance of challenging systemic biases. Her story resonated deeply with aspiring lawyers and judges, inspiring them to use their positions not just to uphold the law, but to ensure that justice was applied equally to all. Camille became a mentor, guiding young legal minds and empowering them to stand against injustice wherever they encountered it. The impact of Camille's work was undeniable. Within a year, police departments across the state had implemented new training programs that emphasized de-escalation techniques and cultural competency. Reports of excessive force decreased, and communities reported feeling safer and more empowered. The once divided relationship between law enforcement and the public began to heal, and trust slowly started to rebuild. Camille's unwavering dedication to justice had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond Fort Collins. Her story inspired communities across the country to push for similar reforms, sparking a national conversation about police accountability and the need for equitable treatment under the law. Camille didn't seek recognition, but her name became synonymous with resilience, fairness, and the relentless pursuit of justice. One evening, after attending a community meeting where young activists passionately discussed the next steps for reform, Camille stood on the courthouse steps, reflecting on how far things had come. A young woman approached her, eyes filled with admiration. "Judge Johnson," she said softly, "you've shown us what's possible. Thank you for giving us hope." Camille smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "The work isn't done," she replied gently, "but together, we're making progress." For Camille, the fight for justice was never about personal redemption. It was about ensuring that future generations wouldn't have to endure the same injustices she had faced. Her unwavering commitment had transformed a moment of humiliation into a movement for lasting change, proving that when one person refuses to stay silent, they can inspire an entire community to rise and demand a better future. Camille Johnson's journey from a victim of injustice to a catalyst for change was not merely about personal redemption. It was about transforming the system that had failed her and countless others. After her wrongful arrest in a public park by officers Carter and Daniels, Camille used her position as a respected judge to fight back, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been unfairly treated by the justice system. Her decision to pursue a civil rights lawsuit was the beginning of a battle that would ultimately bring about sweeping reforms and change the culture of law enforcement in her city and beyond. The viral video of Camille's arrest had ignited public outrage, sparking conversations about racial profiling, police misconduct, and the abuse of power. But for Camille, the fight was never about media attention. It was about accountability and justice. She meticulously built her case, gathering evidence that exposed not only the misconduct of the officers, but also the systemic biases that had allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Camille's work was methodical, her focus unrelenting. She partnered with community leaders, civil rights organizations, and legal experts to ensure that her case was more than just a personal victory. It was a blueprint for change. As her case progressed, public support surged. The video had resonated deeply with marginalized communities who had long felt powerless in the face of injustice. Camille became a symbol of resilience, inspiring others to come forward with their own stories of mistreatment. Town halls were filled with voices demanding reform, and petitions calling for police accountability gained thousands of signatures. Camille knew that this momentum was an opportunity to push for long-term change, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. Her efforts extended beyond the courtroom. Camille worked tirelessly to advocate for policy changes that would prevent future injustices. She pushed for mandatory bias training for law enforcement, the establishment of independent civilian oversight boards, and stricter protocols for handling cases involving minority communities. She also championed transparency in police practices, ensuring that body camera footage would be readily available to the public and that misconduct would not be swept under the rug. When her lawsuit finally went to court, Camille's arguments were not just about her own wrongful arrest. They highlighted the broader issues plaguing the justice system. She demonstrated how racial profiling and implicit bias led to unnecessary confrontations, and how unchecked authority created a culture of impunity among officers. The judge presiding over the case recognized the gravity of the situation and ruled in Camille's favor, awarding damages that she immediately pledged to use for community initiatives aimed at promoting police accountability and empowering marginalized voices. But Camille's work was far from over. Her influence extended beyond the courtroom, inspiring other communities to demand similar reforms. Police departments in neighboring cities took note, implementing changes modeled after the policies Camille had fought for. The ripple effect of her actions spread across the state, prompting legislative bodies to review and revise outdated policies that disproportionately harmed minority communities. Camille also turned her attention to educating future generations. She began teaching seminars at local law schools and community centers, focusing on civil rights, ethics, and the importance of challenging systemic injustice. Her classes were filled with young, passionate minds eager to make a difference. Camille knew that by empowering the next generation of legal professionals and community leaders, she was ensuring that her fight for justice would continue long after her own battle had ended. One of Camille's most profound moments came during a speaking engagement at a local college. After her speech, a young law student approached her, her eyes filled with determination. "Judge Johnson," the student said, "you've shown me that the law isn't just about rules. It's about people. I want to be part of the change, just like you." Camille's heart swelled with pride as she realized that her fight had inspired others to carry the torch forward. In the months that followed, Camille's efforts led to measurable changes. Reports of excessive force and racial profiling decreased, and community relationships with law enforcement improved. Trust, once eroded, was slowly being rebuilt. But Camille knew that true justice wasn't a destination. It was a continuous journey. She remained vigilant, ensuring that the reforms she had fought so hard for were upheld, and that complacency didn't allow old patterns to resurface. As she stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching a group of young activists gather for a peaceful rally, Camille felt a renewed sense of hope. The fight isn't over, she thought, but we're moving in the right direction. Her journey had shown that when one person stands against injustice, they can inspire an entire community to demand change. And that is the kind of justice worth fighting for. Camille Johnson's story offers a profound lesson about the importance of standing up against injustice, no matter how difficult the journey may be. As an accomplished judge, Camille was no stranger to the law, but when she found herself wrongfully arrested due to racial profiling, she chose not to let the experience define her as a victim. Instead, she used her knowledge, resources, and influence to challenge the system that had wronged her. For older adults who have witnessed societal changes over the years, Camille's story serves as a reminder that change is always possible, regardless of the obstacles. One of the most powerful messages in Camille's journey is that age and experience bring wisdom and strength that can be used to make a difference. Many older adults may feel that their time for activism or influence has passed, but Camille's actions prove otherwise. Her decision to pursue justice was not just about herself. It was about protecting future generations from enduring the same injustices. This resonates deeply with seniors who often worry about the kind of world they will leave behind for their children and grandchildren. Camille's determination reminds us that even one voice, when used with purpose, can create a ripple effect of positive change. Another key takeaway is the importance of resilience and staying true to one's principles. Camille faced countless obstacles, from the humiliation of her arrest to the pressure of taking on a system resistant to change. Yet, she remained steadfast, refusing to be silenced. For older adults, this reinforces the idea that life's challenges do not weaken us. They equip us with the strength to keep moving forward. It is a reminder that, regardless of age, we all have the power to stand up for what is right and inspire those around us to do the same. Additionally, Camille's story highlights the value of community support and collective action. Her fight for justice was not a solitary one. Her community rallied around her, offering their voices and their strength. This serves as a reminder to older adults that connections and shared purpose can lead to lasting change. Engaging with community initiatives, mentoring younger generations, and sharing life experiences can have a profound impact on shaping a better society. Ultimately, Camille's journey teaches us that justice is not just about laws. It's about fairness, dignity, and ensuring that everyone is treated with respect. Her story encourages older adults to recognize their continued capacity to make meaningful contributions, advocate for fairness, and leave behind a legacy of integrity and compassion.